Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to the Sounds of Film. And joining me on the program again is Josh Fox. He's the director, writer, cinematographer, and banjoist for the new film Edge of Nature. Josh is an independent filmmaker and founder and artistic director of International Wow Company, a film and theater company. His debut film, Gasland, earned him a special jury prize at Sundance, as well as an Oscar nomination. His new film, Edge of Nature, is incredible. In this film, Josh is suffering from a neurological problem and he has cognitive damage from long COVID. He isolates himself during the lockdown in a one room cabin and hopes that his beloved Pennsylvania forest can heal him. He films the whole process. His film, Edge of Nature, is playing in New York City this Saturday at the Workers Unite Film Festival at Cinema Village. Josh, thank you so much for joining us on the Sounds of Film.
Oh, thank you so much. And yeah, we're really happy to have a little sneak peek of at the Workers Unite. Always try to show up for the workers. It's not a premiere; it's still a work in progress, and we're very excited to have that. We've done performance version of The Edge of Nature all throughout June at La Mama in New York City, and so this is similar to that. There will be some performance elements as well. Cinema Village, where it's playing on Saturday night at 7:15, is one of those places. I grew up in that theater. When I was in high school, it was a repertory house, and they had two films every day, every single day. And I'm talking about like double features like Taxi Driver and Mean Streets and Brazil and Baron Munchausen and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Marat Sade and Eraserhead and Elephant Man. And if you went before 6 p.m., it was like literally $2
Oh,
or three
wow.
dollars, $3 to get in because it was $6 to get in, and so it was like $3. So I got my whole cinema education there, but I've never had a movie play there. So I'm very excited to have it play there because I was there like in high school. I was just if I wasn't in a play or rehearsing with my band or whatever, I was down at Cinema Village watching Godard and Kubrick and all the greats. And so it's a great place to be.
That's awesome. I love those personal connections. You mentioned that you've been performing the piece. I've
Yeah.
seen the film. I haven't seen the performance. Can you explain a little bit what you mean when you say that you've been doing a performance of it?
Well, The Edge of Nature is a really weird movie, an interesting way that it got developed. It is me alone in a one-room cabin in the middle of the woods, the same woods that we saved from fracking, that the mighty anti-fracking movement, which in many ways was galvanized by my movies. We fought really hard to save those woods and to save the Delaware River, to save the New York City watershed. And thank you to everybody who participated in that. And then this movie puts that nature front and center. It is a film about what the planet is and what our relationship is to it, and living right on the edge of nature in a one-room cabin, no cell phone signal, no internet, very little electricity that comes from one little solar panel, just that I use to charge my cameras and stuff. And so, it's a journey of healing because I got COVID very early on, and I got it in January of 2020, and then a few weeks later started having these crazy neurological symptoms. I had brain fog, I developed a stutter, I had facial tics, I had blinking attacks, and it
Wow.
would happen basically on a daily basis, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. And so I ended up running out to the woods and isolating myself, partially because I was afraid of getting COVID again. I mean,
Hmm.
and because when I did get it, I felt like I almost died. Like I really thought I was done. And I had no idea what I had because it was like January. Do you know what I mean? It was like
Right.
before the whole thing had happened. And so I went off to do this healing. And really, the film is about how we can't heal ourselves without healing the planet, and we can't heal the planet without healing ourselves, because that was the moment that all of our industrial pollution shut down.
Yeah.
In fact, we called it, scientists have come to call it the anthropause, which is the moment when we paused all of our industrial activity. And it was the only time in our history of our civilization that we've actually reduced emissions
Hmm.
enough to stop climate change, right? And that is a moment where people remember the skies turned blue. You could see the stars.
Yeah.
There were bird song increased in complexity because of all the downturn in noise and traffic. There were really measurable impacts on the planet because we decided to stop burning as much. And and there's real lessons to be learned from that moment. Of course, we've headlong run in the opposite direction, and emissions are now at the top they've ever been. We are at the highest level of emissions ever,
Right.
and it's very, very, very scary because we're seeing the impacts on the climate, and on our planet, and on our health in horrible ways. So the film, The Edge of Nature, it was created as this isolation piece, but then strangely, one of the things, there's two things that I credit with curing me, and one of them is in the film. But the other is the fact that right after, in late 2021, I was asked to do some performances in Mexico, in Mexico City, and I started to perform my journey through this whole thing of healing, and that became the opening monologue in the film. So the performance then influenced the film,
Right.
and that created a whole new approach to the film. We re-edited it for a year, and then I realized what I really wanted to do was perform the movie live. So all the music, which is by the great Dougie Bound. Dougie Bound was the drummer for the Lounge Lizards,
Oh wow.
one of my with John Lurie, and
Yeah.
and also the drummer for Iggy Pop, and like all these other groups. And he's just he did all the music for the movie, and so and there's also all these Pete Seeger songs, all these folk songs. So we took the movie, and we projected behind me, and then I built an ensemble, a music ensemble of about 9 or 10 different singers and musicians, and we do the whole soundtrack live
Oh
in
wow.
front of you, and we do the all the narration. I do all the narration, and we double all the dialogue in the film as it's happening. So it's this wild thing where you're forced to watch two things at once, which of course is the way we do it nowadays. Like most people who are watching a movie, about 70% of people who are watching a movie on a streaming platform, we know, are also on another device at the same time,
Right.
which, for a filmmaker is like just crushing because you spend like years on a film and then people are not even watching it. They're like texting and all this shit at home, and stuff. Sorry. Um, so that's like a horrifying thing. So instead of making that something bad, for this performance, we kind of realized, oh, you know what? People are used to watching two things at once. So you can watch the play of this and the film of this at the same time. And it was very successful. We got great reviews. We premiered at La Mama in New York City. We're looking for a place to remount the production now. And so if you come down to Cinema Village, you'll just see the film version and a little bit of performance from me. And yeah, but we're really looking to remount the production because it was, we were getting standing ovations every night, and we hated to close it. It was just a limited run.
I've seen a couple different people do events where it's film and music live
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
live narration, and it's one of my favorite experiences. Kind of as you described, it's just it's hitting all the senses, and it's just such a special, unique experience. I think you're going to be very
Hmm.
successful with that. Um,
Well,
you,
I think we need to innovate right now because I think the movies are in a tough spot.
yeah,
We're oversaturated with media all the time.
right,
We have these devices in our pockets that play us little miniature movies all the time and distract us and think we're informed because the algorithm speaks directly to our cerebral cortex and all of our fears and everything it knows about us. And so we're trapped in this weird echo chamber that is very seductive and very addictive, and it's in our pocket. And so film needs to shake things up, film
hmm
and theater, and the things that are truly the form of expression of human beings, which is 2 hours, 2 hours traffic of the stage. That's what Shakespeare said.
right.
2 hour movies, that's a form that we've had for 10,000 years since the Greeks. And so that's not going away, but right now we're challenged to get people out of that somnambulistic haze of addiction to TikTok and Instagram and all the things. And so I think doing things that are live is one of the ways that we can shake it up.
I love that. You mentioned Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people would understand why you would use his music, but for those people that haven't seen the film, or maybe don't know Pete Seeger as well as some, why all the Pete Seeger songs?
That's a really amazingly important question. So in 2020, if you recall, that was still the beginnings of the Bernie campaign, and so when COVID had set in, Bernie was still in the race, and you know, Bernie's campaign ended and COVID started kind of within the same week. People don't really
Mm,
remember that, you
yeah.
know. So it wasn't just that we were all told to go indoors and lock ourselves away in March. It was that a movement that was the most one of the most significant movements of progressive politics in America in my entire life had just collapsed.
Mm,
And so we were all supposed to be out there knocking doors for Bernie and being on route, doing big rallies and doing all that stuff. So it wasn't just that people don't remember this that all fell apart. So to me, when I was out there in the woods in Pennsylvania, which is right on the border of upstate New York, I was really meditating on that American socialist folk tradition. Um, and Pete Seeger um, actually factored big in Gasland, right?
you're right.
And I ended up playing with Pete Seeger on a number of occasions before he died in the when he in the early 2010s, because he saw Gasland, he really embraced that anti-fracking movement, and I'm a banjo player and he's a banjo player, and they're sort of like I felt that in that isolation moment and in this moment when industrial processes were shutting down, that I needed to think a lot about what was that American folk tradition, what was that American socialist folk tradition. And so Pete's songs right there, and there's a whole bunch of them in the movie, which are graciously, licensed to us by his estate, and I think because of the collaborations we had in the past,
Oh wow.
they were just some of the most important pieces. And I don't know why, but I felt that you know that approach to what our new world had to be was also being built on the foundations of that old world, right?
Yeah.
That we need to talk about workers. We need to talk about, because we were told, right, some workers were essential. Well, what did that mean? That meant that they were going to get killed by COVID, right?
Right.
And that our economy needed to start taking into account people again, not that it ever has, but really the changes that we need to make as a civilization to change our approach to the world and to fossil fuels and to heal the planet also has to do with healing the way this colonial system and this capitalist system works.
You
So
m-
all of that felt like Pete Seeger was a great person and music to evoke there.
Absolutely. You mentioned Bernie Sanders, and
Yeah.
some people may know that you've been very involved in working with Bernie Sanders through the years.
Hmm.
Um, you you also mentioned fracking at the beginning, and
Sure.
I I want to get back to the film, but I have to ask you, like, it must kill you that at this point in terms of the presidential race, that both parties are bragging about like who's more into fracking
Well, here's
than
the
the other.
thing. Yeah, it's a disaster. Well, first of all, let me just say that starts with Barack Obama. Barack Obama made a decision early on in his campaign to completely ignore the largest self-organizing environmental movement in the history of this country, which is the anti-fracking movement. And all of the chemicals that are in the ground, all of the emissions that are coming in, methane that's in the atmosphere, which is supercharging climate change right now, are the fault of Barack Obama. And, you know, Joe Biden actually acted to help us ban it in the Delaware River Basin. But this is a total disaster and something that the Democrats really should have done the complete opposite on. They should have embraced our movement. They should have said these are foreign companies, they're oil companies, they have no right to be pumping anonymous secret chemicals into the ground and polluting our air and causing hyper climate change. They should have just jumped on the bandwagon and immediately said, you know what, we're going to protect people. This is a question of public health, you know, because health and climate crisis, health and pollution are intertwined. 10 million people die every single year from fossil fuel air pollution. 10 million people, right? And if you lived in a fossil fuel polluted area, that was a cofactor in whether or not you died of COVID, right? So COVID was really just a thing that you had a much greater chance of surviving if you didn't live in a polluted area, right? But if you didn't have legacy pollution issues, which are, obesity, asthma, other kinds of ailments, you had a much greater chance of surviving COVID. So, you know, the fact that the Democratic Party is so weak on this and so unimaginative on this is a perpetual problem. I will say that I believe that the issue is only prominent because of the work of the movement and the work of the film. And so whenever they mention fracking, I feel a little bit proud proud
Right.
that they wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't for us. But at the same time, like, that is, Barack Obama decided that this was not going to be they're playing Cold War politics. If in 2008 and 2009, when we started to talk about this, and when gasoline came out in 2010, if the Obama administration said then, 15 years ago, we're going to build a Marshall Plan for renewable energy across America, we're going to build a Marshall Plan for renewable energy across Europe, then we wouldn't have a war in Ukraine.
Mhm.
We wouldn't have Vladimir Putin trying to get leverage over Europe because he supplies and Russia supplies Europe with natural gas. We wouldn't have fossil fuel tyranny in this country right now. We could have built in the last 15 years an entirely renewable energy economy in the United States. Had the Democrats, who have been in charge for most of this time, actually pushed and pursued this issue and made it a moral issue in America and used their bully pulpit to message in the correct way. And I do believe that even though Kamala Harris is saying this at the moment, I do think a lot of that is lip service to what the Democrats have decided is, like a no-no or something. They think they need to be pro fracking to win Pennsylvania, which is absurd because 70% of Pennsylvanians want stronger regulations on fracking, right? So that's to say, oh, we're going to keep fracking because of the jobs is an absolute ridiculous position. And I think that the truth of the matter is that the fossil fuel industry is so powerful and they have such a legacy interest and they have so much money to throw at against candidates that it's literally terror on behalf of somebody like Kamala Harris, who does not want all those fossil fuel dollars being spent against her in the upcoming election. I think that that's what's actually happening.
Mhm.
At the same time, it's always on us as the movement to make sure that these people understand that we're going to fight them tooth and nail. And so, when you take dealing with who you're voting for in this binary, corrupt, ridiculous system, you have to vote for one of those two parties. You have to try to figure out, in my view, you have to try to figure out what's going to create the best atmosphere for your protest, what's going to create the best atmosphere for your activism. With Kamala Harris in the White House, we can go on the offensive. We can go on offense. We can ban fracking in lots of places like we did during Obama, and during Cuomo administration in New York. But if we have Trump in the White House, we're playing defense. We're trying to just stop things from getting destroyed. We're trying to stop the planet from getting destroyed. I mean, if Donald Trump gets elected at this point, in terms of what's happening with climate change, it's just game over for the planet. And we just absolutely have to do everything in our power to stop climate change. And part of that is just getting Kamala Harris in office so that we can then continue to pursue the objectives and of the climate movement. And that's really, really important right now. So, it's like one of those things that does destroy me when I hear it, but at the same time, like, I know what politics is about. I know but I lay the blame squarely on the shoulders of the Obama administration and their big, big, big mistake back in 2008, at the behest of people like Ed Rendell and Hillary Clinton and those moderates, to say, oh yeah, well, we can stop coal and we should be against these things, but the gas stuff is okay. Well, you know what? They were completely wrong. We told them the science. They knew, and they totally they created a huge problem for the whole planet Earth, and that's it's a continual nightmare for us.
Josh, I know fracking is one issue. Are you surprised though at all? I mean, it's been a number of years now. I know you don't like Trump, as you just said, but
No.
but um, but are you amazed that somehow? like it seems like it's not just fracking. It's issues about war
Yeah.
that they've adopted. Like that things are so flip flopped now that that President Trump can make the claim that he's the president for peace and he wants to get out of the wars. I know you don't believe it, but
Well, President Trump
or even the
also,
populism and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Like
Well, I
what's
mean, I
going
think
on
this
with the
is,
two parties right now?
I look, Bernie Sanders came out there as a populist and spoke directly to the economic issues at the heart of the struggles of the American people. And he created that language
Yeah,
that unified a lot of people on the left and on the right to talk about the real things. Let's be honest, like the Democrats are also a party of big business and of corporations,
right.
and that is the biggest problem in America right now. Donald Trump is just lying. And the Democrats are not. The Democrats are saying we are the party of big business. And that's problem. We have to look at what this idea of what the economy is, right? The economy, by and large, is serving the billionaire class, not the American people. And so we um, we have to take on those economic issues. And Bernie did a great job of speaking to that in terms of socialism. When the Democrats don't use that kind of populist language because they can't and continue to be for the corporations, they leave the door open for a charlatan like Trump to speak to these populist kind of positions and lie like crazy because the Democrats haven't found a way to address those popular issues. Now, Tim Walz is doing a pretty good job of actually bringing some of that populism back, right? But I don't. I, I interviewed uh, one of the Nixon John. I think it was John Dean. He was the person who flipped on the Nixon administration. He wrote a book about authoritarianism in America. I interviewed him on my show years
Right.
ago, and he said about 30% of based on like actual science and studying and stuff, he said about 30% of the population of any given country at any given moment are just authoritarians. They don't want democracy. They don't want to think. They want a strong person, strong man, strong woman in office. They want an authoritarian government. So you're dealing with about 30% of people who just want an authoritarian government all the time in every country, all the time. The problem is when you have the middle start to discount the real dangers of authoritarianism and start to have disinformation, misinformation rule their mindset. And of course, unfortunately, in addition to the authoritarians in this country, we have a lot of sexists and a lot of racists. So it's harder for somebody like Kamala Harris in that situation, right? So when the problem is when you have this middle who think that Biden and Trump are somehow in the same category, or like they don't like Kamala Harris, or like the border issues evoke fear. It's all fear-based politics, right? And if we don't have a language of we care about your future, we care about your economic problems, you know, it doesn't matter that the corporations and price gouging are really the problem of the prices going up across America. It's not inflation; it's price gouging. It's fake corporate inflation. We didn't have Joe Biden messaging for 4 years. That was the biggest problem with Biden's presidency. He got a lot done, but he believed that he could just pass legislation and the American public would appreciate that. He didn't have the wherewithal. He was too old. He was too weak. I mean, physically weak to go out there and do the amazing messaging that we needed. The Obama administration was the opposite. They were terrific at messaging and terrible at legislation. They got nothing done, but they knew what they were talking about and they knew what we believed in. And as a result, at the end of this last 4 years of Joe Biden basically just, you know, legislating from the basement of the White House and never coming out and telling the American people who we are. The president tells the American people who we are. Our culture needs messaging. And so we don't realize what he did. We don't realize what was passed. And because of the inflation and people's economic hardship, which is built into this system, right? If you take a Marxist analysis of what's happening in the economy right now, it's late stage capitalism. The wealth will get concentrated in fewer and fewer hands while the masses get less and less. And that's exactly what's happening. But if we're not messaging that and we're not fighting the corporations and we're not saying the inflation is because of the corporations and actually enacting legislation to stop it, then you have problems because people economically are hurting more now during the Biden administration than they were 4 years ago. And Donald Trump can come in and say, hey, I'm going to make everything better. You're going to have more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, even though it's not true.
Right.
This is the issue.
We're speaking with Josh Fox, the director of Edge of Nature. And one of the things that you make a particular effort to do in this film is to draw some parallels between what happened in Nazi Germany and what
Mm,
happened in American history,
yeah.
as well as tie it all to nature. And that's a very ambitious thing to do, but it is one of the major points in
Yeah.
this film. Can you explain to our listeners what you were attempting to do in this film?
Well, the film The Edge of Nature is a lot of complex strands that are woven together, and it took us many years to figure out how to weave them together in a way that sort of made it all make sense. And so, um, boy, how do I even begin this? So, it's well known that Hitler. Well, first, let me just start by saying I'm the son of Holocaust survivors. My father was an infant survivor of the Holocaust. My grandfather was a survivor. And that story is embedded in the film. How did we get to Pennsylvania? Well, all of my grandfather and all of my grandmother's brothers and sisters, and they each had about, 8 or 9 brothers and sisters. They were all killed. The entire family was killed by the Nazis. They only escaped because at 11 o'clock at night, my grandfather decided to just leave. He got a tip that the Nazis were rounding all the Jews up in the morning, and he left that night instead of waiting until the morning, which the rest of the family did, and they all ended up in the gas chambers. So this is a very deep problem for me. And out in the woods, I felt that I was encountering these in dealing with long COVID, and I think a lot of long COVID survivors are dealing with some aspect of PTSD. I'm not saying that it's all PTSD, but PTSD from getting COVID, and COVID is scary, right? If you really had a bad COVID,
Yeah.
you face death, and that's going to cause some traumatic stress disorder, right? So long COVID, part of it at least, I believe, is PTSD, and we have to heal that PTSD as we all heal the other symptoms. So in dealing with that, and PTSD invoking intergenerational trauma, long-term trauma, long intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust, which is in my veins, which is in my DNA, which is inescapable, and healing that intergenerational trauma as I'm trying to heal the PTSD and the long COVID out in the woods, and then walking out into the woods and realizing, oh my God, this is as colonial a landscape as New York City is. That the all the east coast of America was completely clear cut. If they hadn't clear cut the forests, we'd have trees on the east coast as big as the redwoods. So that landscape, which we call quote unquote nature, is actually just as colonial and cultivated as New York City is. And so we think of that as nature, but it's actually a place where you can really see the scars of the last 100 years. And those scars are from the attitude of the colonial culture and the colonial ideology, which is that human beings are separate from nature, right? Most indigenous cultures, Native Americans certainly, and indigenous cultures around the world, you know, we don't have this idea that human beings are separate and more powerful and more important than nature. The idea that we must live in balance with the planet is a fundamental indigenous value. And so for me, having just made the film Awake, A Dream from Standing Rock, and working with those guys from Standing Rock, Doug Goodfeather and Myron Dewey, who unfortunately, is no longer with us, they were both advisors to this film. We were talking about intergenerational trauma from the standpoint of survivors of genocide, which are Jews and Native Americans, right? But going out into the forest and seeing that there are survivors of the nature genocide.
Mm.
There are a couple of trees that are left, and I encounter one of them that's huge. I think of it as a survivor tree. And so when thinking about all of these strands, genocide, colonialism, Hitler one of the things he loved to do was to create national parks. And what are national parks? National parks, he would evict the people from the land and call that nature.
Mm.
Which is kind of crazy, right?
Right.
Considering that, what that means is you just evicted the people who were just taking care of that land, and you decided that nature is better off on its own. Like a lot of people during COVID were saying, "Oh, human beings are the real virus. Human beings are the real evil." I'm like, no, 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 no. Human beings are not evil. Human beings are not a virus. Some ideologies are evil. Some ideologies are a virus, and I would say fascism is one of them. Certainly, Nazism, racism, colonialism are viruses, and they are very they come in, they inhabit, they destroy, and then they move to the next host. This is exactly what Elon Musk is trying to do, right? Elon Musk is a virus. Jeff Bezos is a virus. They want to use this host of the Earth and rocket themselves off to Mars, where they can destroy another place. And so, instead of looking inward and realizing that true peace is not wealth, true peace is not power, true peace is true peace, and that comes from the planet. So all of these things sort of dovetail into each other, right? This idea that we're fighting genocide, the idea that we're healing our trauma, and the idea that we are not separate from the planet, we are not separate from nature. All of those things are interconnected. And uh, certainly when someone is a colonialist, who believes that they have dominion and power over nature, well, then the thing to do is to see the people who are most connected to nature or most connected to the culture and kill them all. And so that's what the American colonialists did with the Native Americans. They called them savages. They said they treated them like animals. That's what Hitler did with my people, the Jews, and that's what is a hallmark of the idea of colonialism, which is the system that we're in right now. And it's still very much the reigning system on the planet. And so, fighting off all those things, healing the trauma, understanding what the American forest really is and what the American experience really is go hand in hand. So, understanding the drama, the trauma, understanding the genocide is a fundamental part of what this continent currently is. If we're going to heal that, we have to heal our relationship to the planet. We have to understand that we are gardeners. We create the planet. We create nature. We are co-creators of this wonderful earth, and that is our responsibility. If we see ourselves as a virus, if we see ourselves as evil, if nature would be better off without us, which is absolutely ridiculous, please understand that no native indigenous philosophy believes that.
And just
No, no real environmentalist believes that we are bad for the planet. That's ecofascism. So it's dealing with all of those things in this film, and so it's both a historical document and a personal journey of healing, and an account of watching the planet heal as we reduce emissions.
you used the word heal. Can you
Yeah,
just one last question? Can you
sure.
explain exactly what you mean in terms of healing? You go into the woods,
Hmm.
sort of like Thoreau, and you go into this cabin. You went in with COVID. You say by the end of the film that you are healed. You go on a journey and you
Hmm.
really immerse yourself in nature, and you discover a lot of things that we've been talking about. How, in what way does nature actually help humans heal, both emotionally and physically and mentally?
Right. Well, I don't know what it is for every person, but we do know that on an emotional scale, being in quote unquote nature, being in the forest, being in healthy ecosystems, sort of realigns and rebalances our whole thing, right? Like our microbiome is populated by microorganisms that come from healthy ecosystems, right? So if you're not playing in the dirt as a child, you are less healthy as an adult.
Hmm.
The planet is literally our mother. Our mother gives us a lot of antibodies through, mother's milk and care and love. Our mother gives us a lot of psychological grounding, right? If our mothers are very attentive and beautiful towards us, we end up being secure in our attachments and so forth. The earth is also literally our mother, right? The earth populates our microbiome, meaning in our guts, where serotonin is created. And we're also learning that a lot of the problem with long COVID is a serotonin deficiency. Okay. Our serotonin is created in our gut. We need to have a healthy microbiome to have a lot of serotonin. This is science. So, as we are encountering this idea of long COVID, I'm sure the same cofactors exist in long COVID as they do in COVID, right? Like if you're living in a polluted atmosphere, which means like probably an inner city, probably not a lot of plants and trees, probably not a healthy ecosystem, you're going to have a worse long COVID. You're going to have a worse COVID. If you're out in the forest, there is a chance, I think, for some of that certainly to heal PTSD. And I think also, although this is just me going out on a limb here, no pun intended, that our microbiome and the healing of the microbiome has a lot to do with getting your hands in the dirt and getting around trees and plants. There's the Japanese tradition of forest bathing. They've found out that as you walk through the forest, you're inhaling certain things that are changing that are changing your biological makeup in ways that are restorative. And so, as we restore that, we cannot. Can you imagine thinking that we could live on this earth and be healthy if the whole thing was paved over? I can't even imagine how horrifying that would be, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine believing that you just build more and more and more and more superhighways and more and more and more and more cars and more and more and more and more suburban shopping malls, and somehow we're going to be a healthy species? That's simple insanity. So we have to reintegrate nature into our lives. We have to reintegrate, we have to take the separation away. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't have a food forest and deer and beavers and raccoons on Second Avenue in New York City instead of cars. The only reason is we've decided that that's not nature's place, that's humans' place. And we are okay with completely destroying and polluting our place, right? Because we're not responsible to nature. But if we decided that we had to reintegrate nature, and this is the only way we're going to survive the climate crisis, by the way, into our everyday lives, and we just decided, we're not going to have any more cars, we're not going to have any more things that pollute and destroy and give our kids asthma, that hit us at 50 miles an hour and break our bones. That we decide that that's not an appropriate or healthy way to live, then yes, we could have a food forest walking down Second Avenue, bicycle paths maybe, and deer and beavers and bears, all the turtles, porcupines, all these wonderful things, monarch butterflies. We could recreate the planet if we simply understood that we are not separate from nature and that we should not be destroying our own habitat because a capitalist like Elon Musk says it's better for him, and a capitalist like Jeff Bezos says it's better for him, and that we are, going to indulge this constant state of addiction that we have, which is called consumerism. So, we are much happier if we're around plants and trees and animals, which is what we're supposed to be, and we can be in charge of the planet. We are still, the gardeners of the planet. We are the forest keepers. That's what our job is, and we're also the storytellers. So if we don't tell ourselves the right story, if we don't say we are a part of nature, if we don't tell ourselves the right story and say we are not going to murder and kill those we think are closer to nature, we're not going to be fascists. We're not going to be genocidal colonial maniacs, right? If we don't tell ourselves the right story, which is the edge of nature, is part of that storytelling, then we're never going to heal, and the planet's never going to heal, and we probably will die because climate change is coming to kill us. And the primary problem, the root cause of climate change is that colonial attitude, the separation from nature, the dispossession of indigenous values, the dispossession of indigenous people from their lands. So this is all part of it. And as a person who is a son of dispossessed and displaced people, um, because of genocide and because of fascism, it's a very strange and ironic thing to be living and growing up in the forest, which is the land of genocide, right? So all of those things dovetail and interconnect in this film, and that's why I'm excited about continuing to talk about it.
So amazing. I love Josh Fox's work.
Thank you.
He's one of the only people mixing together theater and social and political issues and music in such a creative way. And Edge of Nature is one of his best films yet. I think
Thank
I
you.
want to highly
Thank you.
recommend the movie. Josh, where can people go to learn more about this film, and where is it playing again?
Well, as the saying goes, nature bats last. So we've been having a really hard time getting this movie into film festivals, which I do not understand. Doesn't make any sense. It's won awards I mean, in the United States, it's won awards all over the world. In the last festival was in Brazil. It won Best Film, Best Director, and the People's Choice Award. And yet I cannot get it into a film festival in the United
Mm.
States, as a major festival to premiere. But we are doing the sneak preview, one night, one moment, one showing only. Workers Unite Film Festival down at Cinema Village in New York City on 12th Street between 5th and University. A historic and important movie theater in New York's cinema history, Cinema Village, the place that gave birth to David Lynch's career because Ben Barenholtz decided to play Eraserhead at midnight when no one else would play it. So Cinema Village, great, great place. 7:15 Saturday night. Come down, check out the movie. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Oh,
Josh.
Workers Unite. You can find workersunite.org, I think, or workersunite.com. Just Google Workers Unite Film Festival and you can get tickets there. Or you
And,
can get them at the door.
and we'll have to talk again when you start doing this thing theatrically. So I wish you the best
Wonderful.
with that.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks
Thank
again,
you so
Josh.
much.
It was
And
a pleasure.
I really appreciate the time.
Great film. Bye bye.
Bye.